I never imagined that doing something as routine as laundry could unravel my entire marriage, but that's exactly what happened. Last Tuesday, while emptying Ethan's jacket pockets, I stumbled upon a crumpled, bright orange eviction notice. We were 3 months behind on rent. My hands shook as I flattened the paper, praying I'd misread it. My name is Riley, and up until that moment, I thought my life was pretty stable. A decent job at a tech startup, a loving husband of 5 years, and enough savings to start thinking about buying our first home. At least, I thought we had savings. Hey, babe, have you seen my gray jacket? Ethan called from the bedroom. I need it for tomorrow's client meeting. Standing in our tiny laundry room, I gripped the notice like it might combust in my hands. I found it, I said, keeping my voice steady. And something else you might want to explain. His footsteps halted behind me. I turned to face him, holding up the notice. His expression morphed from confusion to recognition to something that sent a chill through me. Raw fear. Riley, I can explain, he began, running a hand through his hair, a telltale sign he was nervous. Madison needed help with the kids' school fees, and then the car needed repairs. Your sister? I interrupted, incredulous. You gave our rent money to Madison? He stepped closer, reaching for my hands, but I instinctively backed away. She's been struggling since Tom passed. The kids. Our landlord doesn't care about Madison's kids, Ethan. He cares about getting paid. I waved the notice in his face. 3 months. How long were you planning to hide this from me? I was handling it, he insisted, though his shaky voice betrayed him. I've got a bonus coming next month. I was going to fix everything. I stormed into the living room, suddenly seeing our apartment through a different lens. The smiling photos of us on the walls. The fancy coffee maker we'd splurged on for our anniversary. It all felt like a facade. What else don't I know? I demanded, turning to face him. What other bills haven't you paid? His silence was answer enough. Just then, my phone buzzed with a text from Madison. Can't wait for family dinner tomorrow. The irony stung, and I let out a bitter laugh. Here was my sister-in-law, cheerfully planning a meal while we were on the verge of losing our home because of her. I'll fix this, Ethan pleaded, taking a step toward me. Madison's getting back on her feet. She just needed a little help. A little help? I snapped, scrolling through our joint bank account. The truth hit me like a punch to the gut. $5,000 in the last 2 months isn't a little help, Ethan. That's all of our savings. He flinched. She's family. And what am I? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Before he could respond, another text from Madison popped up on my phone. By the way, can I crash at your place next week? Just until I find something permanent. Love you both. I turned the screen toward Ethan. He wouldn't meet my eyes. You already told her yes, didn't you? His silence spoke volumes. I walked to our bedroom, grabbed a suitcase, and began packing. Not to leave, not yet, but because someone would have to go soon. When the sheriff came to enforce that eviction notice, I wanted to be ready. Riley, please, Ethan called from the doorway. We can figure this out. My movements were robotic as I folded clothes into the suitcase. You're right. We can. But first, you need to decide something. I zipped the suitcase and looked him square in the eyes. Who's more important to you, your wife or your sister? Because you can't have both right now. The look on his face told me he already knew the answer. He just wasn't ready to say it. That morning at work, I struggled to focus on our new marketing campaign. No matter how hard I tried, all I could think about was the eviction notice tucked in my purse. The memory of boxes scraping across the floor kept replaying in my head, Madison and her kids settling into our spare room while I lay in bed pretending to sleep. Riley? Hello. My boss, Jordan, waved his hand in front of my face during the team meeting. You okay? You seem a little out of it. Sorry, I gestured vaguely at my laptop. Got a lot on my plate. After the meeting, I slipped into the break room to call my best friend, Lila. Before I could even dial, a notification popped up on my phone, Madison's latest Instagram post. Her kids posed in shiny, new soccer uniforms with a caption that read fresh start #blessed, #new beginnings. My stomach churned as I fired off a message to Lila. Emergency wine. My place after work. Her reply came instantly, on it. Bringing the good stuff. When I got home, the scene hit me like a punch. Madison was sprawled on the couch, scrolling through her phone, while her kids tore through the living room. Our living room, the one I used to retreat to after long days at work. Riley, Madison greeted me with a bright smile. Hope you don't mind. I used your fancy coffee maker. The kids were driving me crazy, and I needed a pick-me-up. I looked at the empty coffee pod container sitting next to the expensive machine Ethan and I had saved for months to buy. Those pods aren't exactly cheap, I said tightly. Oh, don't worry. Ethan said it was fine. She waved off my concern. Hey, could you watch the kids for a bit? I have a meeting with a potential client. Before I could even respond, she grabbed a sleek designer bag, one newer and nicer than anything I owned, and headed for the door. Thanks, you're a lifesaver. There's mac and cheese in the kitchen if they get hungry, she added as the door slammed shut behind her. Just then, Lilo arrived, 2 bottles of wine in hand. She scanned the chaos in my apartment. Kids screaming, toys everywhere. My coffee maker looking like it had been through a war, and immediately pulled me into the kitchen. All right, spill, she demanded, pouring us both a generous glass. What's going on? I unloaded everything. The eviction notice, the empty savings account, Madison's sudden move-in. With each detail, Lila's expression grew more serious, her lawyer instincts kicking in. Riley, she said carefully, this isn't just a money problem. This is financial abuse. Don't you think that's a little extreme? Is it? She pulled out her phone and showed me Madison's social media posts, shopping sprees, spa visits, expensive clothes, all while Ethan and I were on the verge of losing our home. And Ethan is letting this happen. A loud crash from the living room interrupted us. Madison's youngest had knocked over my favorite vase, the one my grandmother gave me as a wedding gift.
Suddy.
Aunt Riley, the kid yelled, already running off to his next target. Where's Ethan during all this? Lila asked as she helped me sweep up the shattered pieces. Working late. Again, I muttered, dropping the shards into the trash. He says he needs the overtime to catch up on bills. And I think he's avoiding the whole situation. My phone buzzed, cutting off my thoughts. It was a text from Ethan. Mom's coming for dinner tomorrow. Didn't want you to be surprised. Love you. Lila read it over my shoulder and let out a low whistle. Helen? The queen of enabling herself? Oh, this just keeps getting better. I can't do this anymore, I whispered, sliding down to the kitchen floor. I can't keep pretending everything's okay while they're bleeding us dry. Then stop pretending, Lila said firmly. You're one of the smartest people I know, Riley. Time to start valuing yourself enough to say no. Just then, the front door opened, and Madison waltzed in with shopping bags in hand. The meeting went great, she chirped.
Oh, Lila.
Riley, I got the kids some new games to keep them entertained. Ethan said it was fine. I locked eyes with Lila and saw the anger reflected there, matching my own. Something had to change. I just hadn't decided yet whether it would be my marriage or my sanity. By the way, Madison said, setting down her shopping bags with a grin. Mom's bringing her famous casserole tomorrow. She's so excited to talk about our new living arrangement. I gripped my wine glass tighter, already dreading the upcoming dinner. But as I watched her unpack her latest purchases, an idea began to take shape. If they wanted to play the happy family act, I could play along, just not the way they expected. Dinner the next evening unfolded exactly as I had feared, a complete disaster. Helen arrived with her casserole and her opinions, ready to set the stage for family drama. Madison played the grieving widow role to perfection, while I sat at the table, feeling like an outsider in my own home. Riley, dear, Helen began, passing the untouched salad I'd prepared. Madison tells me you've been a huge help with the kids. It's heartwarming to see you stepping up for family. I stabbed a cherry tomato with my fork. Actually, I've been working late most nights. Big project coming up. Helen's smile tightened, disapproval oozing from her every word. Well, family should come first, don't you agree, Ethan? Before Ethan could respond, Madison's phone buzzed on the table. She silenced it quickly, but seconds later, it rang again. Is everything all right? I asked, noticing her hands trembling as she tried to dismiss the call. Just spam, she said too quickly, redirecting the conversation back to Helen. So, Mom, about that teaching position you mentioned. Her phone rang a third time, and this time, the screen lit up with a text notification visible to all. Final notice. Payment overdue for living room set. Account being sent to collections. The tension in the room became unbearable. Madison shot to her feet and excused herself, practically running to the bathroom. In her rush, she left her phone behind, its screen still glowing with the damning message. I'll go check on her, Helen offered, but I was already up. No, I've got it. Grabbing Madison's phone, I followed her. My heart pounded as I opened the bathroom door to find her perched on the edge of the tub, mascara streaking her cheeks. They're going to take everything, she whispered. What are you talking about? Her voice cracked as she confessed. The furniture, the bags, the gaming systems. It's all rented or on credit. I thought I could keep up with the payments if I just landed one good client. But you told Ethan the money was for the kids' school fees.
It was.
At first, she admitted, her voice small. But then the credit card bills piled up. After Tom died, I didn't want the kids to see how bad things were. They've lost their dad. I couldn't let them lose their home, too. Her words stirred a flicker of sympathy, but it was quickly overwhelmed by anger. So, instead, you let Ethan lose his? I asked, my tone sharp. Her eyes flashed with defiance. He offered. I never asked. You didn't have to ask, Madison. You just had to look sad enough, mention the kids enough times, and he handed over everything. She didn't argue. Her silence spoke volumes. Back in the dining room, I heard Helen consoling Ethan. You're doing the right thing. Supporting your sister. Riley just doesn't understand family loyalty. I pulled out my phone and opened our bank records. $27,000, I said softly. Madison looked up at me, confused. What? That's how much Ethan has given you in the last year. I checked all our accounts last night. $27,000, Madison. While we're about to be evicted. Tears filled her eyes. I'll pay it back. Once I get steady work. When was the last time you actually looked for a real job? And no, posting Instagram captions about being a freelance creative doesn't count. She flinched at my words. You don't understand. No, I interrupted. I do understand. You're scared, but you're not the only one losing everything here. I stood up, holding her phone out toward her. You have two options. Tell Ethan and Helen the truth right now, or I will. And I'll include the screenshots I took of your purchase histories. Her face paled. You wouldn't. Try me. Opening the bathroom door, I turned back to her one last time. I'm done letting my marriage fall apart to protect your lies. Madison grabbed my arm, her voice desperate. Please. Just give me a few more days. I have a real interview tomorrow. I swear. I glanced at her designer clothes, knowing exactly how much they'd cost and who had paid for them. Years of working in marketing had taught me to spot a fake promise when I heard one. You've got until dessert to come clean. As I returned to the dining room, I caught Ethan's voice rising in defense of me. Riley's right about needing boundaries. For a moment, hope flickered in my chest. Maybe he was finally seeing things clearly. But then Helen's response doused that spark. Boundaries? Family doesn't have boundaries, Ethan. Family takes care of its own, no matter what. Squaring my shoulders, I stepped back into the room with Madison trailing hesitantly behind me. If this was a conversation about family, it was time to lay everything on the table. The rest of dinner was a strained affair. Helen dominated the discussion, lavishing Ethan with praise for his loyalty and throwing passive-aggressive barbs my way about being distant. Madison remained quiet, pushing food around on her plate and avoiding eye contact with everyone. When dessert finally arrived, I decided it was time. Well, I said, locking eyes with Madison. Anything you'd like to share? The clink of her fork hitting the plate was the only sound in the room. Her face went pale, and she twisted her hands nervously in her lap. Actually, yes. Her voice was barely audible as she took a shaky breath. I need to tell the truth about something. Helen frowned, her tone dripping with disapproval. Madison, dear, I'm sure whatever it is can wait until. No, it can't. I cut in, folding my arms and leaning back in my chair. Go ahead, Madison. Madison hesitated, staring at her lap as though the words were physically painful to say. I haven't been honest about my finances, she admitted finally. Most of what I own, the furniture, the kids' things, it's all on credit. I've been struggling to keep up with the payments since Tom passed. Helen let out a sharp gasp, clutching her chest as if the news were physically wounding her. What are you saying? I'm saying, Madison continued, her voice trembling, that I've been relying on Ethan too much. And I haven't exactly used the money the way I said I did. Ethan looked stunned, his face draining of color. What does that mean? Madison's eyes darted toward me, a fleeting, panicked glance, before she continued. The school fees were real, but some of the money went to other things. Credit card bills, rental payments, stuff like that. Helen's shock quickly turned to indignation. You lied? To us? To your brother? I didn't mean to, Madison blurted, her words coming out in a rush. I didn't know what else to do. As Helen sputtered in disbelief, struggling to process Madison's confession, I focused on Ethan. His expression wasn't one of anger or betrayal. He just looked exhausted, like the weight of the world had finally crushed him. How much? Ethan asked at last, his voice quiet but firm. Madison's voice cracked as she replied. Enough. More than I should have taken. Her admission hung in the air like a cloud of smoke, suffocating everyone at the table. Helen shook her head, muttering under her breath, Unbelievable. I'm sorry, Madison whispered, her eyes filling with tears. But for me, apologies weren't enough, not anymore. Are you, though? I asked, my voice sharp and cold. Or, are you just sorry you got caught? Madison opened her mouth as if to respond, but no words came out. Her silence said more than any apology ever could. Late that night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the events of dinner replaying in my mind like a broken record. Madison's insincere apology, Helen's theatrical sighs of disappointment, Ethan's infuriating silence. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, a text from Ethan. Mom's upset, but Madison admitted she needs help. I think we're finally making progress. Progress? My stomach twisted with a mix of anger and disbelief. How could he still not see what was happening? The next morning, I couldn't bring myself to go to work. I called in sick, knowing I wasn't in any shape to face the world. Sitting in the living room surrounded by boxes I hadn't unpacked since Madison moved in, my eyes fell on an envelope from Ethan's company. But it wasn't addressed to him. It was addressed to Madison. I hesitated for only a moment before tearing it open. After everything, I figured I'd earned a little curiosity. Inside was a job offer, a senior graphic designer position at Ethan's company, dated 2 weeks ago. The salary was higher than mine after 5 years at the startup. As I sat there, stunned, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from my boss, Jordan. Missing you today.
Hope all is well.
Weird question. Did you recommend someone named Madison Whitman for our design contract? I felt the blood drain from my face. When? I texted back. Yesterday. She said she was your sister-in-law. Her portfolio looked great, but wanted to check with you first. Still clutching my phone, I heard the door open. Ethan walked in, looking exhausted. Hey, you're home. I thought. He stopped mid-sentence when he saw the letter in my hand. When were you going to tell me? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Riley, I can explain. Explain what? That you got Madison a job she's apparently too proud to take? Or that she's still pretending to be the struggling widow while going behind my back to steal contracts for my company. He sank onto the couch, running a hand through his hair. She's scared, Riley. The job at my company, She said it would feel like charity. But taking our rent money isn't charity? That's different. You're right. It is different. I pulled up Jordan's text and held my phone toward him. Because while she's rejecting actual jobs, she's trying to take work for my company. Did you know about this too? His silence was all the answer I needed. Ethan, do you even see what's happening? She's not struggling. She's playing us all against each other, and you're letting her. She lost her husband. He began, but I cut him off. And I'm losing mine. Every day, every dollar, every decision, it all goes to Madison first. When does it end? Ethan reached for me, his voice breaking. I'm trying to help everyone. No, I said, stepping back, my voice trembling with anger. You're trying to avoid choosing. But guess what? Your silence is a choice. At that moment, my phone buzzed again. It was a text from Lila. Just saw Madison at Nordstrom using your credit card. Call me. I held the phone up, letting Ethan read the message. The color drained from his face. That's impossible. I canceled the card she had. When? I demanded. Today? Yesterday? Because the damage is already done. I opened the credit card app and showed him the numbers. $33,000. In one day. Ethan buried his face in his hands. I'll talk to her. Like you talked to her about the job? About the contracts? About our savings? My voice cracked. When does it end, Ethan? Before he could answer, the front door opened. Madison walked in, arms full of shopping bags. She froze when she saw us. Oh, she said, her voice faltering. I can explain. Save it. I held up the job offer. Congratulations on your new position. The one you didn't tell anyone about. Her eyes darted to Ethan. You promised you wouldn't. He didn't, I snapped. But thanks for confirming you're both lying to me. Her expression hardened. You don't understand what it's like to lose everything. Actually, I do, I shot back. The weight of my anger finally spilling over. Because that's exactly what's happening to me right now. I grabbed my keys and purse, heading for the door. Where are you going? Ethan asked, standing up. To work. Someone in this house has to. I paused at the door, turning to face Madison one last time. By the way, I just texted Jordan about your contract application. Don't bother following up. Her face crumpled. You can't do that. Watch me. Oh, and the credit card you used today? It's being reported stolen. Have fun explaining that to the store. As I walked out, I heard Ethan calling after me. But for the first time, I didn't look back. Sometimes, it's only when we lose everything that we realize what truly matters. For 3 days, I stayed at Lila's apartment, ignoring calls from everyone except Jordan. On the 4th morning, I walked into work and saw Madison sitting in the lobby, looking nothing like the polished social media influencer she usually presented herself to be. Just 5 minutes, she pleaded, her voice hoarse. Please. I walked past her toward the elevator. I have a meeting, I said. Ethan left, she blurted out. My hand hovered over the elevator button. What do you mean? He's staying at Mom's now, she replied bitterly. Says he needs time to think. Looks like both of us have managed to ruin his life. Before I could respond, Jordan approached. Riley, do you have a moment? He noticed Madison and raised an eyebrow. Miss Whitman, we need to discuss your contract application. Surprising even myself, I suggested. Actually, could we all meet in your office? Once inside Jordan's office, Madison's composed exterior crumbled completely. I didn't intend to go after the same contract, she began, her voice trembling. I didn't realize it was your company until you saw my name on the client list, I interjected. The one you accessed on my laptop. Jordan leaned in, his expression stern. That's a significant breach of confidentiality, Miss Whitman. I know, she admitted, wiping away tears. I messed up. I always do. But I need this opportunity. My kids. Enough. I said more sharply than intended. Stop hiding behind your children. They deserve better. Her shoulders sagged. What do you want from me, Riley? She retorted. For me to admit I'm a failure? Fine, I'm a failure. I couldn't save my marriage. I couldn't save Tom. I couldn't even keep up the perfect widow act without wrecking my brother's marriage, too. Jordan discreetly left the room, leaving us alone to face the weight of her confession. "You were offered a job," I said at last. "A good one at Ethan's firm. Working at my brother's company. Living under my brother's roof. Using his money." She shook her head. "I needed to show I could achieve something on my own." "By taking my clients?" I asked. "By competing fairly," she retorted. "I didn't use your work or designs. I created everything myself, spent countless sleepless nights." She took out her phone and showed me her portfolio. "See for yourself. Really look." I did, and to my surprise, she was good. Really good. "Why didn't you show this to Ethan?" I asked. "Because he'd just give me everything effortlessly, as usual. Mom would applaud, and everyone would act like I'm not just a charity case. So instead, you maxed out our credit cards and almost got us evicted?" I challenged. She winced. "I plan to repay everything once I secured the contract. Or any contract." She stood and began pacing. I needed to achieve something myself. To prove I'm not just Tom's widow, or Ethan's sister, or someone's charity case. My phone vibrated. It was a message from Ethan. "Can we talk? Really talk. Just us, no family drama." As I looked at Madison, I noticed something I'd overlooked before. Not manipulation, but desperation. The same desperation that had once driven me to work endless weekends, striving to prove I could succeed independently. "The contract is no longer an option," I stated firmly. Her expression fell. "However," I continued, "Jordan is seeking a full-time designer. Entry-level. Your own projects. No ties to me or Ethan. If you're interested, the interview is yours." Madison looked up, a flicker of hope crossing her face. "This is it," I said, meeting her eyes. "Your opportunity to set things right." "Why would you help me? After all that's happened?" she asked. I showed her Ethan's message. "Because sometimes losing everything helps us realize what's truly important." "Jordan, just wanted to let you know Madison nailed the interview. She starts Monday."
Good call, Riley.
I stared at the message for a moment, the weight of everything crashing down around me. The family I had tried so hard to hold together was fractured beyond repair. But for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I could finally breathe. That evening, meeting Ethan at the coffee shop had felt like a last-ditch effort to salvage anything, from the wreckage. And instead, it had only confirmed what I already knew. The ties that bound us had become chains. Helen's sudden entrance had sealed the deal. Her self-righteous declaration that she'd remortgaged her house, expecting me to co-sign another loan to fix everything, had been the final straw. The sheer audacity of it made my stomach churn. And Ethan, once again, sitting there silently, trapped between his mother and me, had left me with no doubt where his priorities lay. I could still see Helen's face when I said the words. I filed for separation. The shock, the disbelief, the rage. But it wasn't her reaction that lingered, it was Ethan's. The pain in his eyes was real, but it wasn't enough. Not anymore. As I walked to my car, I replayed Madison's plea in my mind. I'm trying. Maybe she was. But the damage she'd done, the choices she'd made, couldn't be undone with a single job offer or an apology. When I reached my car, I sat for a moment, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My face looked unfamiliar, sharper, stronger. I wasn't the same person who had let others dictate her life, who had quietly cleaned up the messes they made. That Riley was gone. Pulling out my phone, I opened Jordan's text again, rereading it. Madison had the job now, and it was on her to make something of it. But as far as I was concerned, I was done being her safety net, Ethan's compromise, or Helen's scapegoat. I started the engine and drove off, not toward home, but toward my future. A future I would build on my own terms. Maybe, Ethan said, his voice soft. I hope you find that foundation, Riley, even if it's without me. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The silence between us wasn't the suffocating kind anymore. It felt lighter, like the weight of trying to hold everything together had finally lifted. After a moment, Ethan reached for the stack of papers Madison had left behind. "You should keep these," he said. "She's really trying. It might mean something someday." I hesitated, then took them. "We'll see." Ethan lingered at the door, his hand on the frame. "Thank you for everything. For loving me when I couldn't love myself, and for finally letting me go when I needed to figure it out." I watched him leave, his footsteps fading down the hall. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I looked around the apartment. Empty shelves, half-filled boxes, and the faint smell of coffee lingering in the air. It wasn't home anymore. But it wasn't just a place of loss either. It was a place where I'd started to find myself again. My phone buzzed in my hand. Jordan's text was still open, Madison's name staring back at me. "Want me to pass her name to some contacts?" I thought about everything. The lies, the betrayals, the pain, but also the effort, however imperfect, that Madison had started to make. She'd finally taken a step on her own. "Yes," I replied. "She deserves a chance." I grabbed a box and carried it to the car. One step at a time, I was leaving behind the ashes of what had been and walking toward what could be. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid of it. "Maybe," Ethan said softly. "I hope you find that foundation, Riley. Even if it's without me." I nodded, unable to trust my voice. The silence between us wasn't heavy anymore. It felt lighter, like the weight of holding everything together had finally been lifted. After a moment, Ethan glanced at the stack of papers Madison had left behind. "You should keep these," he said. "She's trying. It might mean something someday." I hesitated, then took them. "Maybe." He lingered at the door, his hand resting on the frame. "Thank you, Riley. For everything. For loving me when I didn't know how to love myself, and for letting me go when I needed to figure it out." I watched him walk away, his footsteps echoing down the hall. The apartment felt quieter than ever, but for the first time, the quiet didn't feel like loss. It felt like possibility. Looking around, I saw the empty shelves and the boxes that still needed to be packed. The faint smell of coffee hung in the air, a reminder of what had been. This place wasn't home anymore, but it wasn't just a place of heartbreak either. It was where I had begun to find myself again. My phone buzzed in my hand, and I glanced down at the message from Jordan. "Want me to pass her name to some contacts?" Madison's name stared back at me, reminding me of everything. The betrayals, the hurt, but also the effort she had started to make. I thought for a moment, then typed back, "Yes, she's earned a chance." I grabbed a box and carried it to the car, feeling a small, steady sense of purpose. I didn't have all the answers, but I didn't need them. I was leaving behind the ashes of what had been, one step at a time, and moving towards something new. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid of where it might lead.